may have noticed that I like to travel. In the last 5 weeks, I have spent some time in or near some deserts. In December, the week before Christmas, our family traveled to Southern California to visit some family and also do some sightseeing. One of the places we went was Joshua Tree National Park, where the Mojave and the Colorado deserts meet. It is a vast expanse of the driest land in North America. Death Valley is nearby, aptly named for its extremely hot temperatures and lack of water. We did not go there. Joshua Tree is known for huge piles of rocks pushed up from within the earth over millions of years and then weathered by dry winds and flash floods to create smooth surfaces and create slots. But of course, Joshua Tree National Park is also known for and named for the Joshua tree plant, seen all over the area. Its scientific name is Yucca brevifolia, and it's actually a member of the asparagus family, related to the agave, not a cactus, although there are lots of cacti around as well. And then the first 2 weeks of January, I traveled with Kurt DeGood and Lauren and Mark, two Elizabethtown College students, to the Gambia. Situated in sub-Saharan Africa, the nation of the Gambia follows the Gambia River inland like a snake. This river provides access from the Atlantic Ocean and hosts a massive diversity of birds and other wildlife. It has also historically provided access for outsiders to resources like gold and ivory and people. It is estimated that as many as 3 million enslaved persons were taken through this route between the 17th and 19th centuries. While the Pirong forest, which we explored with our guides, is lush, it is consistently noticeable that we were not that far from the arid Sahara Desert. The ground is often covered with thick, deep sand, and a red dust blows and covers everything constantly at this time of year, waiting to be washed away by the welcome water of the rainy season that will begin in a few months. But I don't just like to travel around the world. I like to travel around ideas, too. And I like to travel around people's stories. The stories of people that you travel to, those whom you meet by chance or by intention. The stories of the people that you travel with, whether that be strangers or colleagues or friends or family. Isaiah brings us into the story of a people, God's people, who are hearing words from a prophet. Draw near, O nations, to hear. O peoples, give heed. Let the earth hear and all that fills it, the world and all that comes from it. The book of Isaiah is generally understood to have been written by and edited by several authors and scribes between the mid-8th century and the early 4th century BCE, so a really, really long time ago. Sometimes I think that makes it difficult for us to relate to this and other similar prophetic Hebrew Bible texts. But it is attributed to Isaiah ben Amoz, or son of Amos, and his lifetime was likely on the early end of that time frame. Revisions to the text in the following centuries did not change the message, but found connecting points to Isaiah's message in events and lives that followed. And I might suggest that we can do the same. To set the stage a bit, these are present-day maps zooming in to show the area of the world that we are talking about. You can see Israel and Jerusalem off to the left, and Iraq and Baghdad off to the right. And the great expanse between the two is the northern Syrian desert portion of the Arabian Desert. Pre-Isaiah, this area east of the Mediterranean Sea was divided into the northern and southern kingdoms, with Samaria as capital of Israel in the north and Jerusalem as capital of Judah in the south. Alliances were made, territory was attacked, and the short story is that the Assyrian Empire took over this area eventually acquiring the northern kingdom, and the southern kingdom gave its allegiance to the Assyrian Empire. Of course, it was not that simple, and there was much warfare and killing and destruction in the process. And as power often goes, it does not last. The Assyrian Empire began to wilt, and the Babylonian Empire strengthened. Tensions arose with Egypt to the west, and the land of Judah, what had been the southern kingdom, was caught in the middle. In the part of the story that might be most familiar to us, eventually the Babylonians, under Nebuchadnezzar, took Egypt and also took Judah. Jerusalem was destroyed, and the population was exiled, sent out to Babylon. Less than a century later, Persian King Cyrus led an upset over Babylon, and the Jews were allowed to return to Israel, where they began to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple, walking across that vast expanse of desert on the way. These writings that we're going to focus on today in Isaiah probably fall somewhere in the middle of that. Some of this turmoil and tragedy has already unfolded, but some is yet to come. Thus, the prophetic voice of, here is what it looks like God has done and is doing, and here is what God is going to do next. So if we can step away from the centuries later distance that we inhabit and the overview of the political struggle and the violence for just a moment, let's think about the people. We have a community of families and individuals who have been absolutely wrecked for generations, centuries, lifetimes, by war and death and movement and uncertainty. Through the desert they trod to Babylon, and through the desert some of them eventually trod back. But it was not the same people. It was not the actual physical same people, because lifetimes had passed. Children and grandchildren were now the people. And it was not the same people because lives had changed. Intermarriages, attempts to settle firmly in a new land, learn a new language, assimilate into a new culture. Should they stay or should they go back? It seems like these texts in Isaiah 34 and 35 that I will read likely come in the middle of that, serve as a bridge between the earlier chapters of this lengthy book of Isaiah and the later chapters. And in these pages, Isaiah is anticipating the exile that is to come, but more potently focusing on God's purposes for God's people beyond exile. Draw near, O nations, to hear. O peoples, give heed. Let the earth hear and all that fills it, the world and all that comes from it. For the Lord is enraged against all nations and furious against all their hordes. He has doomed them, has given them over for slaughter. Their slain shall be cast out, and the stench of their corpses shall rise. The mountains shall flow with their blood. All the host of heaven shall rot away, and the skies roll up like a scroll. All their host shall wither like a leaf withering on a vine, or fruit withering on a fig tree. For the Lord has a day of vengeance, a year of vindication by Zion's cause, and the streams of Edom shall be turned into pitch, and her soil into sulfur. Her land shall become burning pitch. Night and day it shall not be quenched. Its smoke shall go up forever. From generation to generation it shall lie waste. No one shall pass through it forever and ever. But the hawk and the hedgehog shall possess it. Did you know there was a hedgehog in the scripture? The owl and the raven shall live in it. He shall stretch the line of confusion over it, and the plummet of chaos over its nobles. They shall name it No Kingdom there, and all its princes shall be nothing. Thorns shall grow over its strongholds, nettles and thistles in its fortresses. we hear about God's vengeance against some nations, specifically Edom, likely due to its role in the destruction of Jerusalem. The description of the gore caused by the nations' warfare against each other really does not leave much to the imagination. Their slain shall be cast out, and the stench of their corpses shall rise. The mountains shall flow with their blood. The reference to the host of heaven suggests that everything in the created world has been affected because of the nation's violence and warring. Eventually, it's not so much destruction that the author attributes to God's treatment of Edom, but nothingness, a barren wilderness, lost and alone and abandoned. No kingdom there. This text forces us to consider God's character. We are often most comfortable thinking of God as kind and comforting, but this representation of God's vengeance is very present in the biblical texts, quite poignantly here in Isaiah 34. And it poses an intentional contrast to the pieces of God's character that we know to be full of life and joy, like the crocus blooming at the beginning of Isaiah 35. And I think this text also forces us to consider the biblical authors. One of the ways that I often understand the biblical text is that this is a written witness by some person or persons of their experience of God in the world. It actually is very powerful to consider that these texts were written by humans as ways that humans understood and wrestled with and witnessed the power and movement of God's Spirit in their world. These texts were written as ways that humans reasoned through the things that were happening to them, which for many were understood as divine activity. For Isaiah, that movement was witnessed and understood to be God attacking the people and land of Edom. But I think it is important to notice that God did not create the destruction and death described in Isaiah 34. The nations did. The warring people did. They were fighting, territorial, finding glory in power. God's vengeance was to eliminate that, and it is described as eliminated by devolving back into a lack of structure, unorganized, lifeless, a non-entity. No kingdom there. Commentaries note that this apparent vengeance of God has historically been used by Christians to affirm and defend war and violence. What if the vengeance here does not end with the abandonment and wasteland? What if the vengeance, what if the response, the answer, the retaliation in God's provision is God's provision of salvation, God's arm of healing and wholeness and peace for individuals in the world, an opportunity to clear the slate and start fresh, start anew, a clearing of the land, reversion back to wilderness, so that a new creation, a transformed community can arise, a complete reversal. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are of fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. Like a Joshua tree, poking out of dry, cracked, rocky soil. Like the Gambian forest, green and teeming with life, just below the dusty red Sahara Desert. Like the crocus, emerging from the wilderness and the dry land, blossoming abundantly. Joy and singing emerge from the stillness and quiet of life without direction. Rejoicing and gleeful cheering, particularly powerful and penetrating after hours, days, weeks, months, years that have been unbearable, unlivable, hopeless. Maybe that's how God gets back at the nations that war, by offering resources and love and care to those without. Maybe that is God's response to human suffering, suffering with us, prioritizing the least of these, arming other communities with the power to respond to their neighbors in need with resources and care. We often hear God's judgment in negative and punitive terms, but we see here that God's judgment, God's assessment of the situation, God's evaluation of how things are and what potential there is for the future is focused on offering salvation and recreation. God still judges the world and the created order and the people in it to be good. Let's not neglect the truth of God's anger. God is ticked at the nations that are warring and fighting and killing each other and unable to get along. God is angry about people who diminish and harm others based on difference, those who make others feel small or unimportant or unwanted or unloved because of things like race, gender, age, job, income, ethnicity, where someone calls home, or who someone loves. There are real captivities in which we find ourselves, economic hardships with no visible path out, vocational uncertainty with doors that don't open and windows that seem to be stuck, political reins that tug, boxing us into prescribed attitudes and choices, personal relationships and community connections that are limited or limiting, spiritual questions that go unanswered, unsettled, distractions and insecurities everywhere we look, painful reminders of past mistakes that grip and paralyze, a lack of sense of belonging, feelings of inadequacy, loneliness, anxiety, depression, unending grief. Yet even in the midst of that, even when gripped by those feelings and experiences that weigh us down, even when our soul is parched because of those long days of trudging through the desert sand, scratchy grains caught between our toes, the sun beating down on our backs, endless, unchanging scenery, alone or in community, even then, the crocus can bloom. A glimpse of joy, the crack of a smile, a moment of calm, a deep breath. God's glory can still manifest. Courage, take heart. God is here, right here, on his way to put things right and redress all wrongs. He's on his way. He'll save you. It may not take away every concern in the moment. Transformation rarely happens in a snap. But there is a unique and unexpected beauty that arises from the desert. God is with us. God sees us and hears us and hurts with us. And at some point, perhaps the most unexpected time, a green shoot will poke through. God is putting things right. And our task is to notice and to tend it and to put all of our bulby energies into maintaining that tiny sprig of life. We are to be soil, trusting that God will provide the environment that can nurture even the most stubborn of plants, even in what seem to be the most surprising of growing conditions. May it be so.